You are now entering the horror sanctum.
Hello, and welcome back to the Horror Sanctum podcast. I'm Jay with John and Kelan, and we are gathered here today to discuss one of A24's latest films, 2024's I Saw the TV Glow, directed by Jane Schoenbrunn. Sorry if I'm mispronounced that. If you're unfamiliar with the film, a classmate introduces teenage Owen to a mysterious late-night TV show, a vision of a supernatural world beneath their own. In the pale glow of the television, Owen's view of reality begins to crack. Of course, this is a brand new movie. Spoilers will be told here. And this was my suggestion. And it's kind of funny because TJ can't be with us for this episode, rest his soul. But I brought the two most cynical people in the group to talk about an artsy A24 movie. And I kind of knew where that was going to go, but we'll see. So let's turn on the TV, get lost in the mesmerizing glow of the pink peak, and 2468, time to disassociate.
From horror, because that's not what this is. I was completely lost by the time the movie ended. I'm not going to be overly hateful for that, but do we just slap the horror tag on anything that says age 24 at the beginning now? Is that just like the thing?
It is.
Because even Men, for a little bit, you could say was more of a drama than it was a horror film.
Yeah.
And this falls into that same category. This to me is 100% a drama. I don't think you can slap a couple of minutely scary scenes in there or have some what could be considered scary by certain demographics, because that's what this movie is. It's an allegory for people who are disenfranchised, specifically transgender people. Thank you, Jay, for reminding me that it would be important to read about this, because I didn't catch any of that. I caught glimpses of it knowing that that's what it was about because I read a little bit beforehand and Jay had kind of told me. But that's my biggest problem with this movie. Sometimes artistic movies try to be too artistic. They try to be too vague. They try to be too veiled in allegory to force you to really think, when I don't really want to think that hard about a movie. A perfect example of when this is balanced really well is the Jake Gyllenhaal film.
Brokeback Mountain.
No.
Bubble Boy. You're talking about Bubble Boy. That was a very complex film. Are you talking about Enemy?
No,
Enemy,
the
Prisoners?
with the rabbit.
Donnie Darko.
Donnie
Darko, yes.
I don't know why. I
got it
thought you
sitting
were
over
going to
here.
talking about Brokeback Mountain. I was, but yeah, okay, sorry.
Way to stereotype, John. Just because that's the kind of movie we're talking about doesn't mean that's all the movies I can think of. But Donnie Darko does a really good job of balancing an artistic vision and thinking with an enjoyable experience. And that's where this one kind of is lacking. It's very well done in scenes, but it also looks like every other movie that's shot in this style. The drama that's within the movie feels dramatic because of the tension built in the scenes, but not because you truly understand what's going on in the scenes. When I first started this movie, before the pink opaque name came up on the screen, I texted the group and I was literally sitting here wondering, what's the pink opaque? Because I thought I was like, is that like a character? And that got me in the wrong direction early. I was thinking there was going to be some kind of creature that was going to be the Pinkope, and it was going to emerge from him. And speaking of which, there's this scene where he pulls his chest open, like the light is emerging from him. I read that was that was symbolism as well. And I think that once you understand that that's what this movie is about, then that's a really good symbolism, is that he's the light within him, he's kind of repressing. So if you take it as being a movie about the difficulty of being yourself, even if you take the transgender part out of it. I think all of us experience this, especially if you were bullied or if you were picked on in high school, where you feel like the parts of yourself that are unique need to be suppressed because of an overt desire to fit in that stage of your life. I think for the most part, most people, not until they're into their 20s do they start to really become who they really are, unless you were, the popular jock in high school and you were going to be a jock anyway, and you end up being a teacher and you teach gym in the high school that you graduated from because you can't get out of that. But I digress. But I think we can all kind of see a little bit of that character in ourselves. My problem is, like I said, it's so veiled, you don't understand it. If you have to go back, like Beyond the Black Rainbow, if you have to go back and find a Reddit thread or find a page where somebody describes or explains, or the director himself has to word for word explain to you what the movie is about, then I think it missed the mark. And that's what my problem with this movie is. It just missed the mark in explaining. You can have some moments where they're open to interpretation, where it's vague on purpose. But if you have a very specific idea of what the movie's supposed to be expressing, then what you're putting on screen shouldn't be that vague. Right? Like you have an idea, like, this is what I want to express to people. It's like a Jackson Pollock. Who knows what any of those paintings really mean to him, because it's just splatters on a canvas. It's random colors thrown in the most random possible pattern with no intentionality beyond being obscure. And that's what this movie does. It's so obscure to the point that when it does reveal a little bit of itself, you're more lost than you were before the movie started. The acting in this movie is great. Justice Smith is fantastic in everything that I've seen him in. He's a great actor. He does a really good job towards the end when he's kind of withering, because he's not able to really be himself. He's suppressing that. He's being who he thinks that he's supposed to be. The example that was for him, the being suppressed by his parents, being suppressed by himself, that where his lips are starting to chap. He's having a hard time breathing. He's apologizing to everybody for having a moment of being something other than just the quiet guy. So he portrayed the character great. The other actress in the movie that was across from him, Bridget, what's her last name? Lundy Payne. She had a moment in the movie that kind of took me out of it, and it's when she has her big monologue, and it felt so forced. It felt like they were really trying to make this a really dark, intense moment where she's on all fours and almost snarling, and she's giving this, really deep monologue that goes on for what feels like 5 minutes. But there was no other sense of drama or purpose around it. Like, it didn't feel like it was anything other than her just being weird in that moment, her being intentionally intense. There was no, and I think that's what was missing from this movie. The big bads that were in the movie, the Mr. Melancholy, which nice touch in the movie to have Tonight for Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness play at one point when your main bad is the face in the moon, which was also in that music video back in the 90s. But they're big bads that are they're vague. They're not really chasing them. There's not a monster that's threatening me. At least in Men, the men were the monster. The guy that was everybody that was closing in on her, it built a kind of sense of dread within it. There was never a sense of dread built in this other than just a feeling of uneasiness that you didn't even know why you felt uneasy. So yeah, I can't say that I just hated this movie. But one, I don't know why it was called a horror film. I finished the movie, could not explain it. I couldn't explain it to somebody else. If they were like, "Oh, have you seen that horror film? I saw the TV glow." No, because it wasn't. And then two, sometimes just treat us like we're five and kind of give us an idea of what you're trying to tell us, and then you can be vague, or then you can be more indirect, but at least send us in the direction that you're wanting us to go, and then hope that we can get there later. Don't send us on a snipe hunt with a bag and a stick and hope that we at some point in time in the middle of the night realize snipes aren't real. So that's my thoughts. John?
Yeah, I typically don't like art films, not because they're just art films, but just the mechanics of the storytelling is like everything you just said is why I didn't like Men. It wasn't the idea of the story and what was being told. It's more like the mechanics of how they tell it. And I think this movie, I kind of feel a little mixed on because there's a lot of it that I think is really well done. I think it's some of the prettiest cinematography I've seen in a long time. I think like when you see the shots of the main character, I think riding a bike and the way it follows, like it's really beautiful. The acting is all really solid. It captures the 90s very well. So you feel like that show you're watching feels like a Nickelodeon show that they're watching. And I know someone I read online called this like Nickelodeon David Lynch, which is kind of a similar vibe. It's got like a Twin Peaks type vibe to it. I just think that like a lot of what you were saying with stories like this, you're using certain mechanics to tell a story. Obviously, here it's like you're saying it's an allegory for identity being transgender, and I think that's an important story. I think it does matter. I just think there's movies that do it so much better. I'm much more of a fan of like linear storytelling. Like I mentioned Brokeback Mountain earlier as like, an LGBTQ movie. Like that's a great film. And I feel like that film captures so many things in it that's really important for a lot of people in this world. And
That reminds me, Hedwig and the Angry Inch. That's another fantastic movie in that genre that does a really good job of expressing, that the struggle that you go through being transgender.
Right. Yeah. And it's I don't have a problem with the idea of the story. I just think when the filmmaker makes a movie like this, the way they made it, especially with A24 has this thing where I don't know, I was like we're repeating stuff, but it's like they tell a story, they want to tell a story, but then they want to make it a little bit hipster and weird just because they can. It's like they can't just tell the story and make it odd in a way that makes sense or interesting. They have to do it just enough to where you're just kind of like, what the fuck was that for? Like there's a part in this movie where they're in a bar and you randomly see this girl like scream singing in a microphone, and I was just like, that just annoyed me. I was like, why did we need that? Like,
I
why
almost
was that
text
in
y'all
there?
was like, was she dating the director or married to the director? Because it
Right.
was just a music video right in the middle of a movie.
I just can't stand when movies try to be different just as a way to be different to capture a niche audience. When in fact, in my opinion, when you're doing that, what you're doing a lot of times is you might be capturing a niche audience who's younger, but you might be alienating people who want to hear this story who don't understand it, right? Because the mechanics you're using are so confusing that some people may just be like, I mean, I'm not speaking for people. I'm just saying like a lot of people may see that and just be like, what is this? Like, I don't get what they're doing, right? And I think it's just like to each their own. Like some people want this type of storytelling approach, some people don't. I can't say it's a right or wrong. I'm not an art film fan, so it's not right for me to just be like, this is badly made, because I think for what it is, it's very well made. It's not for me at all. There's a lot of things about, like I said, the way A24 in particular tells stories that I like some of it, and then others I just can't help but roll my eyes because I'm just like, they're trying so hard to be the cool kid, and that's sometimes where they lose people. Is they have a great story, a great idea, but they just do something that's a little bit too ridiculous or hipster, and you're just like, you could have like, you didn't have to go that far outside of the realm, right? But
You know what it kind of reminds me of? For the people that have watched X-Files, and yes, I've brought this up like 1,000 times, but when Fox and Dana start talking about something and they're using like medical jargon or very large words to explain something, and you literally have no idea what they're talking about because they're so above you, that's kind of what this movie is.
right.
It's like it's intentionally trying to be intelligent to prove how smart it is.
Exactly. Right. And I don't think I don't know. I think I can understand why they tell a story this way. I do get it, but it's not I'm not a fan of this kind of storytelling, and I don't know. I don't hate the movie. I don't really like the movie, but I don't necessarily dislike the movie. There's a lot here that I think could have been done better or differently. But I also think maybe the filmmaker probably wanted to do it this way for a specific reason, and I get that. I've kind of learned with these type of films, like I know that I watched the movie with Scarlett Johansson. Um, what's the one where she's the alien walking
Yeah.
around?
What is the name of it? Maybe I know what you're talking about. It has a
Yeah,
lot of erect penises going into the black muck under this under
Put the name of that
skin.
movie in
Under
our
the
Oh,
Skin.
never mind. Never mind.
Yeah, Under the Skin.
Google
Yeah.
it. Kellen's
And
googling it right now.
and you know, like I did not like that movie, but I also understood like a lot of people may find some pretty cool things in that movie that I don't know. It's just one of those things where art films is hard because I try to rate them on an objective scale, but it's tricky. But I do think there's a cool story here. I think it's important to tell. And if nothing else, you get to see Fred Durst looking like Uncle Fester, so that's kind of fun. But yeah, Jay, I know you probably liked it, but I'm curious.
I did like it. That's why I suggested it. The Fred Durst thing is something I did in the group text, and I was like, "Holy shit, Fred Durst was in this movie," and I had to Google it because he plays the dad, but he's like so pale and bald, and it was just like you don't really see him that often. So I was like clueless it was Fred Durst. Um, so the club scene with the music, I looked into that because I was curious about it too. And the director, it's Phoebe Bridgers and a band called Sloppy Jane, or an artist called Sloppy Jane. And the song they sing has the lyrics, "I think I was born wanting more." So that's why that ties in. And the club is supposed to be kind of like a bridge between the Pink Opaque, the surreal, and reality. And it was compared to like David Lynch and the club in Mulholland Drive, Silencio, Club Silencio, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they added that in there. Maybe the director's dating the girl too. I don't know. But Phoebe Bridgers did the soundtrack. So I'm gonna say this real quick. That soundtrack was fucking amazing, and it's sold out everywhere. Because I that's the first thing I did is I went looking for it because it's such a good soundtrack.
Is she the one that covered Tonight?
It's possible. I'm pretty sure she produced it all too. But let's look at my 2 pages of notes. So it's LGBTQ forward. It's the story of this kid who wants to be who he truly is, but he can't because he wants to succumb to this normal life that he thinks he's supposed to have. His parents push on him, society pushes on him. He meets the girl. They find the show. The show was kind of like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Power Rangers. The ice cream creature was terrifying the first time we saw it. The moon guy, what was his name? He was terrifying.
Mr. Melancholy.
Mr. Melancholy, the moon face minions he had, all that was terrifying. As far as it being horror, it's psychological horror. And that can be relative to the person watching and in it, I believe. Like him struggling with all this, whether it's his identity crisis, whether it's, do I bury myself alive and go into this other world and be who I should or I want to be? Like that's just the psychological horror element. And they sprinkle in just enough creatures to push it over that line. It's kind of like when we did an episode on Silence of the Lambs. Is Silence of the Lambs a horror movie? Is it? I don't know. Like, there's elements of horror. Angel, elements of horror. They horror is so hot right now, which is why A24 is jumping on the train too, because they did some, but I feel like they're starting to crank them out more. Horror is so mainstream and popular. That's what they're trying to do too. Like, let's slap horror on here. Let's just put it on there and it's going to sell. And it does. Aesthetically, the visuals in this film were amazing. It's an emotionally resonant film fueled by that and the acting from Justice Smith. It's an 84% on the tomato meter, critics 70 audience. And we've already talked about our rankings and we'll get that to the end, but that's fair for me. It's not fair for you guys. And again, different strokes, and we all look at things differently. I kind of gravitate to films like this. If you guys didn't like this one, do not watch We're All Going to the World's Fair, her other film, the director's other film, because you'll fucking hate it too. I didn't like it as well as this one. It's still good. I don't know. This one I read about before it came out, and I saw pictures, and it pulled me in from the beginning. So when I was able to watch it, I was excited. Again, like I said in the beginning, I knew you two cynical SOBs probably wouldn't like it. I know John's not a big elevated horror fan, art fan, but it's just that gender dysmorphia storyline. It is kind of hard to just make a straightforward movie about that and have it be profitable, entertaining throughout. Like you just come out and say, hey, I'm struggling with my gender identity. That's the movie. Whereas this, they kind of spin a web around everything. And the TV was supposed to signify, the glow of becoming your true self and going into that world, where the girl does and comes back and tries to get him to go. He's not sure, again, because he's had these societal norms pushed on him so much. And we've all done that to a degree, like whether it's, dealing with depression, like I've done since high school and college. Like that, there was such a stigma on that in the beginning. You didn't really talk about it. You're like, oh, you're sad, just get over it, just be happy. That's what people tell me all the time. And it's just not that simple. It's not as simple as like, just be yourself. You want to wear dresses, be yourself. You want to, you're a boy, you want to like boys, do that. It's just not that simple. So that's why they make movies that aren't as simple, because life in that situation isn't as simple. The ending, do you think the ending was positive or negative?
Oh, negative for sure. I mean, it was clear.
Kelan?
Yeah, it was obviously. Well, shit, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about half the movie anyway.
Well,
so
I'm setting you up, so don't say obviously.
It felt negative to me. If the whole premise was him supposed to be suppressing himself, then that was the final suppression.
He was apologizing.
Literally, yeah, it almost sounds like he's dying in that scene as he's, like you said, apologizing to people, and he's seen what's inside. He gets a glimpse of what's inside of him and then has to hide it away again. So I mean, I don't see how that could not be negative.
Yeah, well, so when I told you, like I always text you when it's a elevated horror or artsy or whatever you want to call it, like there's articles about movies like this because it is so complex. And like for this one, I watched this and then I went and watched Uncle Peckerhead, because that's just such a perfect contrast from I'm having to think about this shit, now I'm having to read about it. Now this guy turns into a zombie for 13 minutes at midnight. It's just such a black and white. But I think the ending seems bleak, but there is some positivity there, because first of all, that whole scene with him working at the arcade or whatever it was devastating. That whole thing was devastating. But when he opens up his chest and he sees that glow, to me, that was saying there's still hope. There's still a chance he can go to the other side and be who he wants to be. Maybe he does. But I think he can still join the peak with that still resonating inside of him. That's what I read. And after I read that, I kind of went back and watched that scene. I'm like, yeah, I can see that. Like, it's still there. It's still inside him. It's still calling to him. And there's still that chance he's going to turn it around and go bury himself alive, which was like wild to me. But I get the metaphor. You're killing your old self and becoming your new self. Like, I get that. He goes back and watches the pilot, and it's super cheesy. Like, the ice cream creature is like the one from Pete and Pete. Yeah.
Mr. Tasty Freeze.
Right. So what that did, and Kelan has spoken about this to nauseum about well, fuck, I can't even think of the word now, but like having a feeling for something from the past. Why can't I think of that word? Nostalgia. Jesus Christ. He had that nostalgia for that show his entire life. He goes back and watches it, and he's like, a completely different show. And we've experienced that too. He doesn't see the value in that anymore. He's too removed from his happiness. He's buried his personal expression again to be normal. so all that, like, again, I liked the movie to begin with. After I went back and did a little research and read a little bit more, I liked it even more. But that's me. I like weird shit because I am weird. I mean, hell, we had a podcast called Weirdos. I'm telling, we're weird.
We did a whole episode
tastes.
on nostalgia.
We did. We just have different tastes. So I don't know. I think it's an important film. It's going to resonate with a lot of people, whether you're struggling with your identity or not. And even if it's not something to do with gender or LGBTQ, if it's depression or anxiety or something else, this movie still can resonate with you to that degree, because you can, okay, instead of him not knowing about his gender, maybe he doesn't know how to be happy, he wants to kill himself, and he can go to this other underside of the universe and be who he truly wants to be and be happy. So all that tied into a bow is why I liked it. I'm going to buy it as soon as it comes out. I kind of do want you guys to go see. We're all going to the World's Fair now. I think it's on HBO Max, or excuse me, Max. Just so y'all can text me how much you hated it. That'd be fun. But I like this one better. But anyways, that's going to be it.
I will say real quick, if this is supposed to be a representation of what it's like to be transgender, they have a scene where they basically pointed him being asexual. So why have a scene where he doesn't identify with anything and then try to make the whole movie about him identifying as being transgender but not being able to either realize it because of society or not being able to allow himself to express that? Because he literally has the scene where she asked him, do you like girls, do you like boys, and he's like, just thinking about it makes me sick. Yeah, I like TV shows. Like he had no attraction to anything, but he was able to express or feel a sense of expression through the characters on the TV. So it kind of, in my mind, that it kind of becomes confusing if this whole thing is about the transgender experience. Why have him be asexual? Because most transgender people it's more of being in the wrong body, not identifying sexually with or having a sexual identity. It's about being, like I said, trapped in the wrong body, or feeling like you should have been born the opposite of what you were.
Yeah. So I think the story could be open-ended too, in a way. I mean, because I know that there's a possibility, even though that is probably the allegory, it could be maybe intentional that maybe it's more open-ended about identity and like struggling with your inner self and what you want to be.
But then that
was the reason. I don't know.
They have him in scenes wearing like the pink dress, where it's obvious like there's part of him that wants to be more feminine but can't express that because he has the overbearing father and the mother that's submissive. So he feels like his role to either be masculine or have his mother's qualities and be submissive to society's will. So I'm just it's just confused. Like I can get, like, because her character obviously has the arc where she looks feminine when they meet. She mentions that she's lesbian as far as she prefers women, but then you see her later and she looks masculine. She's dressed like a man. She has the short hair now, and that's kind of like the one thing that alludes to this has LGBTQ plus undertones or is overtly telling that story, but it doesn't do as good a job with him, in my opinion. And again, like Jay said, I'm not a big fan of art films. So
I kind of read that part where he says I like TV shows just as him being so confused with everything, like
right.
And being put on the spot and in that situation, you're like, it's kind of like when we're in school, like, do you like me? Like, I like G.I. Joes.
Or maybe he's just so repressed because he's trying to live up to both of his parents' expectations.
And they both have the worst qualities. And when you combine that into one, genetic person, that's a struggle for sure. So I hate to do it, but we'll go around and give our rankings.
Whoa, hold on. Maybe real quick, maybe this was like a revelation. If you really go back to the scene in the car, I don't know why we're deep diving now at the very end, but if you go back to the scene in the car where he is asking if he can stay up late to watch the Pink Opaque, and it's his mom sheepishly kind of telling him, well, your bedtime is it 10, 15. Most kids in ninth grade don't have a bedtime, and she's looking at the dad like, what do I do? Like she's sheepishly, and if you take that as in the over the top definition of toxic masculinity, like, isn't that a show for kids? He's that could be him identifying more with the feminine side because his entire personality is wrapped up in what his mom is towards the dad, where it's very reserved, almost looking for other people to tell her what she should do. So that's his idea of what femininity is. I mean, that's what we all deal with you grow up to kind of be your parents, or if you don't get out of that situation. If your dad was an abusive alcoholic, you have a tendency to become that yourself. If your mom was in abusive relationships, you tend to grow up and be in abusive relationships. So maybe that was like a little thing there of showing him identifying more with his mother because he's kind of like her in that scene. That's his idea of what a woman is, and he can't come to terms with it because he's supposed to be a man, but at the same time he's letting society be the man and dictate how he should react. Anyway, I'm done.
Well, just go ahead and give your ranking now.
As a horror movie, 1. As an art film, 2.5.
So we're gonna go with 2.5. All right, John.
Yeah, I kind of see where you're going with that, Kelan, but I think I've just had a long day. I was kind of confused for a minute I was just like, my brain just started to mush as you were going, and I was like, huh? But I see what you mean. I mean, I don't like these type of mechanics of films. I think A24 is kind of like the Creed Bratton of film studios. They're just weird. They're just weird to be weird, like they're eating an onion instead of an apple for no reason sometimes. And you're like, okay, well, that's all right. And it's not that, like I said, I think the story is important. I think there's good stories here. I just think the mechanics are just so strange. You're going to split the audience with the way you tell the story. And that's okay. I'm sure the filmmaker doesn't care. I would bet anything the filmmaker is like, who gives a fuck? I want this to be for people who get it. I get that. That being said, it still, in my opinion, goes against the fundamental idea of filmmaking that you want it to be successful and people to like it. But I know that some people just don't have that. It's a different mindset, right? It's a 2.5 out of 5. It's fine. I'll never watch it again, but I think there's a lot of good stuff about it. And I think the story is important. So,
well, that gave us a 3. I'm kind of surprised. So that gives us 3 for I Saw the TV Glow. I was kind of looking at Rotten Tomatoes and see if there were any critics like kind of deep dove into it, but there's not really many, so I'm not going to get into that. So, all right, that's it for this episode. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, to wherever you're listening to this podcast. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and join the Church Horse Sanctum on Facebook. Signing off, I'm Jay with John and Kelan. And until next time,
keep it spooky.
we're going to have a spooky battle there.
We both went in. When I saw John went in, I figured I would just pull out instead of us trying
That's
to.
what he said.
But finger.
I bet you thought we were both going to give that a 0, didn't you?
I didn't think it was going to be a 0. I thought maybe it would be lower than a 2.5. Well, Kellen's technically was, but fuck that. I pushed it up.
Well, I said 1 as a horror film because I can't in my mind I can't put this as a horror film. I can put Silence of the Lamb as a horror film because you have Buffalo Bill who's stalking and killing people. The whole realization that the Hannibal Lecter killing the officers and wearing the guy's face. I mean, there's things in that, and what makes Silence of the Lamb more of a horror film than this is you could imagine that happening in reality, and that's what makes it terrifying. This is more, you could look at this as a horror film for a very specific person, somebody that's going through a gender identity or going through a personal identity crisis, and could be scary for them, but as a general horror film, it's not, because it's not anything that would be terrifying for the average person. The average person's going to watch this and they're going to be like, at no point was I scared.
It's more like art house fantasy, kind of. It's more what I thought was like fantasy art. I didn't really even think about, like, even when I was watching it, I forgot it was a horror film. I was just kind of like, oh, it's kind of just like a artistic fantasy type film with a message.
Well, like I said, it feels like they want to they slap a couple of scary clips in, and that makes it a horror film. I mean, like Heebie-Jeebie TV, is that really a horror film? No, I mean, you could call it a horror comedy, but it's just like as an actual horror film, it's more of a love letter to the 80s and 90s, with elements of horror. But I mean, again, the only real thing in that whole movie that was horror was the Finner story, where the guy's wasting away and then ends up eating and cooking himself. The rest of it was kind of just like comical things that happened to be kind of scary. Granted, I loved it growing up on Pee Wee's Playhouse. That was absolutely in my wheelhouse of things that I would enjoy, which is why I gave it such a high rating. I think I gave it a 4, maybe 3.5, 4. But again, I wouldn't even call that a horror film.
Yeah. I'm looking. I'm going to read a couple of these reviews, then we can go. This was a 5-star. This movie altered my DNA in a very real way. It was so fantastic.
I'm kidding. Please delete that.
It was so fantastically heart-wrenching. Some of the reviews for it clearly show that people have a hard time understanding and empathizing with experiences. I'm not going to say that was Kelan, since he has a lot of empathy.
Hey, Hedwig and the Angry Inch, I would give a 4, almost 4.5. That movie is
fucking fantastic,
phenomenal.
Now here's some bad ones. Mm-hmm. Really slow and boring. Don't waste your time. Okay, sure.
I've been described the same.
Definitely not worth a $20 movie rental. Engaging enough to watch to the end, but disappointing by the ending. I could have written a better ending for this movie myself. Very slow.
I don't know about that.
I changed his grammar on there because he's obviously a fucking redneck. And then Blakely C, a total exercise in mediocrity. This is an example of someone trying to be clever and sound smarter than they are. The plot is pointless. No. And monotone. Voicing gets old after 10 minutes. Visually, it's just another 80s VHS palette of oversaturated video game graphics that have been used so many times it's become a meme unto itself. This is the part I call bullshit on. The audience was laughing, and I don't think that's what the director intended. Safe, not save your money, because again, they're fucking stupid. Where would the audience have laughed in that movie?
There's nothing funny about it.
There's no moment. That's why that's someone trying too hard to piss somebody off or to sound cool. There's nothing funny in that movie. There's nothing that you could say. Even
well, I mean, again, I didn't get all of this movie. It would be one that if I wanted to really understand, I would have to read more and watch it a couple more times to truly start to grasp the things. I don't think it warrants that because I'm not its intended audience. But at no point was anything. The only reason you're laughing at this movie is because you're an asshole and you're laughing at the absurdity that somebody could be going through something that you don't understand.
Well, right. And I think
gay my ass.
I just
be a man, shit like that.
As they crack open a Bud Light.
And my thing is like
the gayest of beers.
With and A24 is a biggest proponent of this kind of shit. Is like they make a film that's divisive, or maybe the way they tell a story is divisive. So what happens is you have people who love it, you have people who hate it, who say ignorant shit, but then you have sometimes people right in the middle who might have like a little of both, or maybe say something, but they're dismissed. Or I see so many times like a film like this is made and a filmmaker is like, well, you just didn't get it. You're an idiot. So you don't, it's like you can understand something and not like it. Like you can fully get something, disagree with how the mechanics or something is made, and not enjoy it, and not be an idiot or a bigot or a racist or a homophobe. Like that's what kills me about our society is like we're at this point where that's how people like. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just our culture in general, but like that's why like in general, like anytime something like this comes out, if you don't immediately love it, it's just like people are just like, well, you're this, and I'm just like, I call bullshit on that. Life is not that simple, right?
And again, sometimes you don't have to be so artistic that you're pretentious.
Right.
Sometimes it's okay to tell the audience this movie's about gender identity and the struggles that people have with it.
Exactly.
And you have two different characters that are both going through those things. The feminine character that obviously longs to be more masculine and goes through the pink opaque, and then you have the main character who refuses to take that journey.
Yeah.
You can be a little more direct. You can have scenes where it elicits that he's struggling with an identity other than his own without trying to be so vague and like I said, artistic for the sake of being artistic. Right. I'm not saying that all audience members are dumb. But the majority of us, yeah, English hard, English real
English.
hard. But the vast majority of us like you to kind of tell us what your movie's supposed to be about. Imagine if Indiana Jones was searching for the Holy Grail, but at no point did they mention he was searching for the Holy Grail, and at no point did they identify that the bad people were Nazis, and you were just supposed to figure out at some point in time that the Nazis were trying to steal the Grail for magical reasons. They didn't give you any dialogue or backstory. It's just a random guy running through the desert or running through catacombs who just occasionally says, "Why did it have to be snakes?" Without any context, that whole movie is lost. So
Yeah.
sometimes you can just go ahead and say, "Hey, this movie's about being transgender."
And sometimes and I know these things are not for everyone. I mean, I don't know. I think that's the biggest disappointment I have with films a lot of times now, especially like A24, is that they come at it so hot. Like, if you don't like this, you're an idiot. You don't like this, you're wrong. And it's like, that's never been how film criticism is or how movies are made or discussed. I just think that our society is just built in that way that you can't nuance these things anymore. You just have to be all or nothing. And I know that we know this. I really do feel like there's a lot of people out there that think this way, because if you put a negative review about this in like a Reddit thread or something, people would just shit on you. They'd be like, "You're a fucking idiot. You're this, that," and they wouldn't even want to hear any of it. You know?
When it goes to what you said too, like, this is a niche audience movie. This movie was created, was written, was shot, was completely made as a niche audience film. But like you said during the episode, John, this is a story that needs to be told. There is a section of the population, there's a section of teenagers right now who are hitting puberty and they're confused. And even if you're looking at it as more of just being brave enough to just be yourself, it's a story that should be told, that people should be able to hear, and you should do it in a way that doesn't feel like you're alienating half the audience because you're trying to be too pretentious with the subject matter.
Well, she also might not give a shit about that half the audience.
And that's what I'm thinking.
It's not made for them. I was just thinking while y'all were talking, I'm like, a movie that is important and that needs to be, presented simply, why would you make it confusing like this? But I also thought, like, if it's your birthday and I just hand you something unwrapped, it's not as nice as if I wrapped it. Like, it's more like a gift to that part of society than anything else. And some filmmakers, they don't give a shit about the other side, then that's their prerogative. So that might be it. Like, we have enough straight movies. I don't have to
I feel like at that point you're just making it for yourself, though. You're not making it for your audience, because most of your audience is going to be an average moviegoer. They're not going to be that artistically inclined or that deep, and most of them probably aren't even going to know about this movie unless it pops up on a thread that they follow where somebody
showed
else
at the
is
Belcourt here. That's the only place it showed around here is the Belcourt, of course.
The ending did get me, because it was, I mean, I will say, like, thinking about it later, it was really sad just thinking, like, the suffering he felt. Like, I don't know, there's something about his acting. It really kind of, later on, I thought about it, and it was like, I don't know, it's just like this empathy. It made me feel bad, like, imagining, like, I don't know. It was sad. I don't know why someone would laugh. Why would anyone laugh?
It was heartbreaking when he's apologizing to everybody for his outburst.
Yeah.
And even in that scene, and that was one of the things that I did read, and I was like, well, that's kind of gut wrenching, is that when he does have that outburst, that whole scene where nobody's looking at him and nobody hears him, or he's alone.
He's invisible.
He's invisible. Yes.
Yeah, which is a metaphor in itself. I did not expect this episode, even though this is after TJ better not cut this off when he edits it. I didn't expect this to be an hour episode. So bravo, boys. Bravo.
Shame on you for underselling me and John.
And I don't think it was on.
Jay probably wrote 4 pages because he thought we were both going to be like, this thing was garbage.
It sucked.
I mean, history has told me that, but I don't think the screen was on me. Is when Kelan was talking. Did anybody else see my cat's butthole? Like, she just went full on typical stereotypical cat. Like, she got on my desk and like butthole.
That's awesome.
That's why I laughed, and I think Kelan thought I was laughing at something. He said I wasn't laughing. I was preoccupied with the butthole being on screen. So you're such a
who wouldn't be?
All right, laters, Gators.